Committee to order.
Does anyone, the attendance has been taken, or the absence of Member Bell, any member have an addition to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to add under other business what I'm calling kennel site-specific zoning bylaw application fees. I shall, and I gave the clerk a heads up on that lengthy addition. He has that.
Any other member have an addition to the agenda? Seeking no one else, seeking approval of the agenda, Member Howe, second by Member Pierce. All those in favor? Opposed? So carried. We have no delegations listed tonight. Does anyone have a pecuniary interest? Seeing no one, we will move on to adoption of the minutes. Previous meeting. Member Chambers, second by Member Bailey. Any questions on those minutes? Seeing no one. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Does anyone have any business arising from those minutes? No one? Then we will move on to 7A. Point of order. I'm sorry? Did the chair turn on the microphone?
Normally I speak rather loudly and people get sick and tired of me yelling, so I'll try and talk softly, let the microphone handle it. We'll move on to public hearings to consider a signed bylaw amendment, and I'll turn that over to our site control person, Ms. Kitchen, would like to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. The subject lands are located at 524 Cockshuck Road in the geographic township of Oakland. The lands are designated agricultural within the County of Brant official plan and zoned agricultural within the County of Brant zoning bylaws 61-16. The applicant is requesting an amendment from signed bylaw 121-08 to allow for an existing structure to be recognized as a billboard sign in the proposed location constructed for the purpose of advertising on behalf of the Ohsweken Speedway. The list of relief requests have been included on page 11 within the report for reference. Staff identified an error on page 11 of the report prior to this evening concerning relief request number 4. The sign bylaw would require that the sign be set back a minimum of 400 meters from the lot line within an agricultural designation. The sign has been constructed at 1 meters from the lot line, in keeping with the requirements for a ground sign. The sign was initially reviewed by staff as a ground sign, which was an error, as the sign is proposed to advertise a good or service or event which is not hosted on the subject lands, which the sign is located upon. A full history of the file has been provided within the recommendation report for committee's review and reference. Comments received from internal departments concerning this application have been attached for your review and consideration. Staff also received comment from a member of the general public prior to the meeting, which has been attached as an addendum item for your reference as well. Staff recommends approval of this application subject to the conditions outlined within the report. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing no one, is the applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present? Please come forward.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your committee for giving us this opportunity to speak on the sign. I won't get into why unless there's questions on why, but I will just very, very briefly. Has anyone ever been to the Ohsweken Speedway, to the track? Okay. Okay.
We're not here to answer your questions, sir.
No, I just, out of curiosity, sorry, Chairman. Well, where it is, it's in a farm that I've owned for 44 years. It's in the field, of course. It's in, the land is worked in two different directions. So it's right in the V or the Y shape on top of the hill. One's worked east and west, and the other field's north and south. The sign is located 500 feet from the residence to the east, and about 1,850 feet from the corner of the Hagan Road to the west. And it was installed by professional signing people. And really, the only other thing, as my wife handed out, I went around and talked to the people in the area, and within, I believe it was 110 meters around the farm, the people, and everyone I talked to was in support of it. Seen no complaints of any sort. It will not be lit or any reflective. And it was constructed by professional people, like I said. And with your help and working together, I think it'd be a good relationship with the Ohsweken Speedway. And that's about all I have to say.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing no one, thank you. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Please come forward, state your name and address.
My name is Jennifer Esselman, and I reside at 521 Cockshut Road, which is directly across the road from the sign. So I was in contact with Bylaw originally due to the concerns with safety of my friends and family. The sign is directly located across the road from my private driveway to and from my residence. It was concerning for me to see such a large sign and what I see to be a fairly heavily traveled commuter route, and in one of the few areas on the road where both cars can pass in both directions. I have two small children that reside at that property with me that are daily on and off the bus, and while supervising them on many occasions, I've seen drivers having to stop suddenly, as well driving recklessly to overtake other drivers in that area. It's also noted that there's been many accidents in that area, and the road's been closed on numerous occasions since I resided there in 2002. In my opinion, the sign will draw driver attention away from the road and towards the sign, and therefore not looking for my friends and family coming and leaving from my home. Although Brant County and the MTO do not consider signs and billboards to be a distraction, they do have clear requirements on what setback distances are. The Brant County, as stated by Jessica Kitchens, states that billboards approved in the agricultural zone are required to be 400 meters from the street line or 25 meters from a property line and in compliance with the MTO. I did speak to someone at Brant County, and the street line definition is typically the fence line. So in the package of the information I gave you, the first two images are the location of the sign from my driveway and my driveway looking towards the sign. And then the third one is, you can see that the sign is directly in line with the fence line. My concern is that although, so Section 7 of the Brant County bylaw for the signs, 7.1 states, where a sign is allowed in a zone indicated by Section 6 of this bylaw, no person shall erect, display, or alter or permit the erection, display, or altering of any sign except in accordance with Schedule A. Schedule A is where they outline the setback distances. So I'm struggling with why we would allow a sign in Brant County to pull driver attraction away from those roads at an area where there are my private residence and two other farm access driveways there. I also did note that he made a reference to them being professional contractors that installed the sign. I spoke to the gentlemen that were building the sign. They had been on my private property to access water from my garage while I wasn't home. So when I spoke to them about why they were in my garage, they told me they needed the water to set the cement for the sign, and that they had been paid a couple $100 from Oswego Speedway to install the sign. So as far as I know, the information that he provided saying that it was a contracted, skilled contractors is not reliable. They were working out of the back of a Pontiac.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public would like to speak to this application? You can sit down, folks. I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll turn it back to committee, and how does committee wish to deal with this application? Member Coleman? Seeking a seconder, seconded by Member Gatward. Any member of committee with a question or concern? Member Gatward.
I'd just like to comment, Mr. Chair, the policy MTO numbers that the last delegation was quoting, I believe they're for MTO roads, and this is a county road.
Any other member of the committee would like to comment on this application? So moved and seconded, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This application will go, this approval will go forward with the planning advisory report to council 3 weeks from this evening. Moving on to Section 8, public hearings under the Planning Act to receive information from the public. There are none listed. We'll move on to 9, public hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. The first one is 9A, a zoning bylaw amendment, and I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Committee. Planning staff has undertaken a housekeeping amendment with regard to the County of Brant zoning bylaw 61-16. This application proposes to correct general text and mapping errors throughout the document, as well as modify items such as definitions, general provisions, zone provisions, and parking requirements as outlined within the attached draft bylaw. The proposed amendments and updates are consistent and in keeping with the County of Brant official plan. Notices were placed in the local newspaper regarding the proposed amendments, as well as posted on the County of Brant website. As a result of circulation, comments were received, which staff have responded to prior to the meeting this evening. Comments received and responses have been attached to the report for committee consideration and reference. Staff is requesting approval of this application and the proposed amendments outlined within the draft bylaw. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question or a planner? Member Bailey?
Is there any urgency for us to approve these tonight?
Through you, Mr. Chair, urgency is a matter of opinion, I think. There are some factors that do affect private property owners in here, so we are looking to get back to them to advise them on what the decisions have been regarding errors in mapping, regarding zoning on their properties. So we would like to move the amendments forward as soon as possible.
It's just there's a lot of information here, and I would be more comfortable if I had another period of time to look at it. You've really put a lot into this document, and unless anyone is hanging by their fingertips on a ledge somewhere, I would suggest that we receive it as information and bring it back at another meeting. Is that possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is possible. It was brought forward for information in January, but we can bring it back if committee feels as though they need more time to consider the amendments being proposed.
If I may help you, Member Bailey, even if you approve this evening at this committee, it will not be finally approved until council 3 weeks from this evening. Would 3 weeks give you enough time to peruse this application and bring forward an opinion at council in 3 weeks?
That would be enough time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Member LaFerrier?
With the recent news about the provincial government asking municipalities to pump the brakes on bylaw changes, zoning changes, and things like that, is that something we should be considering? If not today, then perhaps in the 3 weeks intervening, or are we likely to get clarification from the province in those 3 weeks before our final decision's made?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that those amendments that they were speaking to were with respects to 5 or 10-year reviews of documents, not necessarily undertaking housekeeping amendments, which are typically minor in nature and don't take a look at the overall document with respects to large major changes.
So this wouldn't be like the same as the comprehensive zoning bylaw updates that they're recommending we pause on?
That is correct. It would not be the same, and we did undertake our comprehensive review of the entire County of Brant zoning bylaw in, well, it was prior to 2016, but that's when the document was approved. So there was quite some time and quite a few years of work and research that went into the document, and it was approved in 2016.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question or planner? Seeing none, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this bylaw amendment? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this bylaw amendment? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public that would like to speak to this bylaw amendment? Seeing no one, turn it back to committee. How's committee wish to deal? Member Pierce? So moved. So moved. Seeking a seconder. Member Coleman. Any questions or concerns from the committee? Member LaFerrier?
Just a comment. I just, on the record, I want to thank Staff Kitchen and the staff in general for the way they handled so many of the responses from the public and the developer community on items that they wish to see moved and changed, and very comprehensive, very professional, and very well done.
Any other member of committee with a question or a comment? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And of course, this will be part of the Planning Advisory Committee report in 3 weeks at council. So anyone opposed will have an opportunity to speak against it at that time. Moving on to B, Peter and Jamie McMahon, 186 East River Road, ZBA 1-19-DN. And I'll wait for Dan Mizniak to come forward and present. Did I do better than this? Perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have the rezoning application being presented for recommendation this evening, ZBA 119DN. The application is for the property located at 186 East River Road. The agent is Civic Planning Solutions, David Rowe, and the applicant is Jamie McMahon. So the rezoning application for the property at 186 East River Road was presented and received for information at the February Planning Committee. Planning staff are requesting for a decision on the application, which proposes to rezone a portion of the subject lands from rural residential to site-specific rural residential zoning to permit a lot having a frontage of 10 meters where a minimum of frontage of 40 meters is required. The rezoning is required as a first step in order to facilitate a subsequent consent application to sever a new lot and construct a dwelling at the rear of the property. Planning staff's analysis, as outlined in the report, indicates that the application is not in conformity with the County of Brant official plan and does not maintain the general intent of the zoning bylaw, and therefore staff cannot support the proposal. The subject lands are currently designated rural residential in the official plan. The official plan provides general criteria for determining whether or not a rural residential designated land are suitable for further development. Rural residential designated areas may experience limited growth where the pattern of new development is logical, compatible, and consistent within the context of the existing development. The official plan also describes that lots created within the rural residential designation must be consistent with size and nature of surrounding lots while being consistent with the minimum size and frontage requirements of the zoning bylaw. The minimum frontage requirement within the rural residential zone is 40 meters. The frontage of the existing lots along East River Road range from a minimum of 40 to 150 plus meters. Although the existing lot fabric along East River Road contains irregular and flag-shaped lots, these lots either maintain or exceed the minimum frontage requirements of the zoning bylaw. As noted in the comments received from our zoning administrator, the recent 2016 zoning bylaw update from the old 11001 bylaw to the current 6116 zoning bylaw. Requirements within the rural residential zone were given much consideration with respect to maintaining the character of established surrounding development and the absence of municipal services. Reduced frontages as low as 9 meters are typically only permitted within the urban residential land use where full municipal services are available. Map 1 is shown up on the screen identifies that the existing lot existing lot configurations along East River Road from generally from Blue Lake to Scenic Drive. The mapping up on the screen identifies approximately 12 parcels that represent existing flag or irregular shaped lots, which may have the potential for similar reduced frontage depth development to that proposed as part of this application. If 10 meters of frontage is approved within the non-urban residential zone category through a site-specific consideration similar to this could potentially be attainable for other similar circumstances within the non-urban residential zone categories, which include suburban residential, hamlets and villages, and other areas designated rural residential throughout the county. I will bring your attention that we had received a letter of concern, which is included in your package, and I believe the letter whom it was received is going to speak this evening. The planning analysis concludes that the proposal is not in conformity with the County of Brant official plan policies, and this is because the reduced lot frontage and resulting lot shape is not considered to be consistent, compatible, or desirable within the existing built-up area along East River Road and does not maintain the general intent of the zoning bylaw. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal does not represent good planning and are recommending refusal of the application. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, the applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present. Please come forward, state your name, address.
Yes, good evening. My name is Dave Rowe. I'm a consultant acting on this particular application.
Peter McMahon, and I own 186 East River Road.
Further to our last meeting in the staff report, the report seems to be really focused on the 10 meters, the frontage. It's being narrow. And we'll back up a little bit, but why such a focus on a dimension? As you know, lot frontages, by and large, from a planning perspective, are used normally to deal with densities. And because if you look at a lot, you look at the frontage, you look at the depth, and if you tend to make lots with narrower frontages, you tend to get higher densities. That's not really the case in this situation. And I had sent Dan today a revised plan, and what that shows, well, I guess two things. Number one, the necessity for the 10 meters was more really from a functional perspective, because we're intending to use the existing driveway as a common driveway, common access for both lots. We actually do have enough frontage. I showed one there at 30 meters. It really does fit in quite well. In fact, we could go to the 40 meters if we're so focused on frontage. What we're looking at actually a very large parcel. We're looking at a situation where we can place a second home, again, well removed from the existing home, well removed from the neighboring home, protected or removed by the use of trees and topography. The lot itself is quite large. If you look out on the road, I thought when initially talking to staff, the main concern at that time was having development at the rear of the lot. And I didn't realize that they were so focused on the 10 meters. We can increase the frontage to 30 meters, which I would think would be more than adequate, or if necessary, we can live with the 40 meters. There's enough frontage on the existing property to accommodate two lots that would have conforming lot frontages, albeit the lot has to go narrower to get around the existing house and then to the rear of the property. The lot itself is very attractive. As again, we do have trees. We did the environmental impact report. That was the first hurdle thrown at us, and concerns relative to where there's significant woodlands there, significant trees, significant habitat. The review indicated that no, there weren't any of those. The comments from the Conservation Authority, aside from alerting us that there are regulations in some areas, not where we would propose to build, so we can in fact build without a Conservation Authority permit. If you look through the other criteria, the only real objection that staff had were focused on the 10 meters. If 10 meters, which is a numerical standard, is the concern. 10 meters, to me, being older, I think of 10 feet. We're talking 33 feet here. We can go to the 30 meters. That would give you 100 feet of frontage. Or if the committee insists, we could go to the 40. I don't think the 40 would be as attractive. I think the 30, personally, I think would fit much better. So we are open to that if that is the significant concern of staff and of the committee. Ready to answer any questions that committee might have.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Member Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Rowe. This is just a landlocked piece of landlocked property? Like I'm trying to.
No.
Why is it? I'm a little confused about the setup.
No. What
Like
we have is one parcel there today, one large reverse L-shaped parcel. What we had proposed was to develop the southerly portion of that property, and by having a common entrance and a common frontage of 10 meters.
So the same people own both properties, and that's how you can make the frontage
Well,
wider?
there's one owner right now.
That's what I mean,
Which
yeah.
is Mr.
Okay,
Mahan.
so that explains how you can just go and make the frontage bigger. if
Yeah,
you
we
need.
have the flexibility to make to increase the frontage. From a functional perspective, the 10 meters is more than adequate to provide access. If the concern is setting a precedent with 10-meter wide lots, we can certainly increase that to 30 meters as an amendment to the bylaw, or we can meet the bylaw and just,
Yeah, no, that's okay. I was a
go to
little
the
bit
40.
confused about that. So, okay, thank you.
thank you.
Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are you asking then for this application to be deferred so that you can amend it from 10 meters to 30 meters for the frontage?
That would be more, I guess, a matter of your committee practice. We are willing, if the concern is the 10 meters, we are certainly willing to have the amendment revised and request the 30-meter frontage, if that is staff's major concern.
When I had first approached this, it was explained to me that the irregularity of the lot, which is, the existing shape that I purchased 6 years ago, it's odd at best. Again, I just purchased it 6 years ago. So 2 years ago, I think, my wife and I were walking around where the proposed new home would be and just saw, great spot for a house. And at that time, I get an idea for possibly we can sever. So at that time, I met with Dan, who, again, had explained, irregular lot shape and whatever. And I had sort of had a roughly drawn idea of around the 10-meter area. And I proposed 10 meters at that time simply because it provides a more normal shape as opposed to a second angle, which is currently drawn in the dashed line there coming off to the road. So if 10 meters was allowed, I believe it would serve both lots the best. The current home, which is there, you're out front mowing the lawn or whatever, you're not having to imagine this angled line where the other neighbor had already cut it, et cetera. So anyhow, at that time, we had decided 10 meters as a continuous strip would be best because it serves the county purpose the best of having the most regular shape, and I believe it serves both lots the best. However, I'm willing to expand it all the way up to 40 meters required. It's slightly irregular, and then my hope would be that it's shared entrance at the front because there is a concern of a hill coming in both directions. So it would be shared for the first 10, 20 meters of the driveway, and after that, I think it would be best if it was two separate driveways. But shared driveway at the beginning would for sure be the most safe entry.
Member McAlpine?
I think he partially answered my question right there, where I was going to say, because it's on the hill there, I was under the impression that the current driveway was located there specifically because of the sight lines, and therefore...
That's my understanding as well. I believe that the current driveway, from a safety perspective, is the best location, and it would have to be a shared driveway.
Member House?
Just a technical question. At the end of the day, ideally, what we're looking for is two 40-foot frontages, right?
Yeah, if you look at the zoning bylaw, the minimum
Or 40
frontage is 40 meters, yeah.
Right, but you don't have room
We do have room, we
to
can
do
do
to
40.
two 40-foot?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
So then my next question, can I ask a question of staff? Does this mean that the applicant has to resubmit their design, or?
Questions to the planner will come at a later date. Your questions right now go to the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open this up to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Please come forward. State your name and address.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Brad Wilson. I'm the owner of 565 Blue Lake Road with my partner Christina Modio. I've previously sent letters prior to the information meeting last month and prior to this meeting, so I'm not going to go through those, but I did say I'd make myself available to answer any questions. And I certainly support staff's report and would certainly answer any questions from the committee members.
I do not allow questions of someone who's giving information. Questions from this committee will either go to the planner or the applicant, not to you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. You're finished? Thank you. Any other member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one else, I'll turn it back to committee. How does the committee wish to deal with it? Member Howes,
At this point, can I ask a question of staff?
after, when it gets on the floor. I need a mover and a seconder.
Okay, thank you.
Moved by Member Pierce, seeking a seconder. Moved by Member Bailey. Questions or questions of our planner?
So in the process, does this mean that the applicant has to reapply with a new design? Or like, should we be deferring this decision for staff to have a chance to review this in light of a changed design?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the application as circulated to the public, that's what we're concerned about in your question, is that adequate notice has been given, and if there are any major changes, perhaps an additional circulation would be required to provide that adequate circulation, and then additional time perhaps for engineering to identify sight lines if we can avoid shared access and kind of technical requirements that could be re-reviewed based on the merits of the new application. As for staff's comments, the recommendation would most likely remain the same, and again, it's getting into, it's not just about the 10 meters of frontage in this case. The 10 meters of frontage in the report was referenced because that's what the rezoning is requesting. The bigger picture is that lot shape. I believe frontage is a tool that we can use to help maintain and get to the minimum requirements for lot size and shape and things like that, and remain consistency along the frontage of the streets. And so in this case, the bigger picture is that shape and keeping consistent with the surrounding area and the existing built-up, and where that dwelling is going to be located in relation to where the existing dwellings are.
Member Ferrier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I see here that there's a quote here in the conclusion and recommendation from staff that it's not in conformity with the policies of the County of Brant official plan, specifically sections, and there's 4 sections. Are all 4 of those inconsistencies with the official plan because of the frontage issue?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the policies referenced, or the sections referenced from the official plan, they all speak to, one is general development, which speaks to frontage as a key indicator for whether or not a site is suitable for development or not. And the other 2 are from the rural residential portions, which speak to additional development in rural residential designated lands, which have a heavy focus on consistency and character within the surrounding area.
So then to clarify, then through you, Mr. Chair, that if they were able to create plans that had 2 40-meter frontages, and I think you said this previously, it would still not necessarily mean a recommendation of approval by staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other member of the committee with a question or a planner? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor to refuse? Opposed? Is carried. This recommendation will go forward with a planning report to council in 3 weeks. Moving on to C, Warren and Crystal Hayhoe, 187 East River Road, ZBA 19-DN. Our planner, Dan, will present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to the previous application, this rezoning application was presented to and received for information to the Planning Advisory Committee in February. This application is a rezoning for the property located at 187 East River Road. Planning staff are requesting a decision on the application which proposes to rezone the entire subject lands from agricultural to rural residential. The proposed rezoning is required in order to facilitate a subsequent consent application submitted to sever a new residential lot having a frontage of 42 meters, a regular depth of 235 meters, an area of approximately 2.8 hectares. As part of the submission of the application, the applicants have provided planning justification for the request along with geotechnical and geological study, reviewing the soil, slope, water supply, and water supply considerations. The rezoning would facilitate the creation of a new parcel with a frontage that meets the minimum requirements of the zoning bylaw, and that is consistent and compatible with frontage shape and area of the existing lots along East River. The proposed single detached dwelling would be placed at depth. This would be considered consistent with the existing built form at depth along the west side of East River. And this can be seen by reviewing a number of houses that are located at the proposed depth of the severed lot. Based on this review, planning analysis indicates that the proposal is in conformity with the County of Brantton official plan and meets the requirements of the bylaw. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal represents good planning and are recommending approval of the application. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or an agent of the applicant here would like to present? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Again, Dave Rowe, the consultant on this application.
Warren Hayhoe, the owner of 187 East River.
I'm obviously in support and agreement with the staff recommendation and the staff report on this application. We're here to answer should there be any questions of committee.
I'll get to that. Any member of the committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing no one? Thank you. Any member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll turn it back to committee. How does the committee wish to deal with it? Member Coleman?
I'll move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Seeking a seconder, second by member LaFerriere. Any questions or comments? Any member of the committee? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This application will go forward to council for final approval 3 weeks from this evening. Thank you. Moving on to D, Ross Island Farms Limited, 223 Highway 5, ZBA 6-19-DN, and I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff are requesting a decision on a minor rezoning application, ZBA 6-19, for the property located at 239 and 241 Highway Number 5, St. George. The application is required in order to satisfy conditions of consent, application B1 and B2-19, which were granted conditional approval at the February Committee of Adjustment meeting. As shown in the image below is our official plan mapping, and a portion of the subject lands fall within the St. George settlement area and are designated urban residential, while a portion of the parcel is located outside, which is where the existing dwellings currently sit. And the north, or the image to the above the official plan zoning, or official plan mapping shows that there is a portion of the property that has a site-specific zoning, which is agricultural employment, which identifies the specific uses related to the Islet feed and supplies operation, while the rest of the zoning is agricultural. So the consent application was to sever two surplus farm dwellings. The dwellings are considered surplus by the purchaser of the farm, being Empire St. George Limited, as a result of the consolidation or acquisition of lands in addition to their existing farmland holdings. As a result of the parcels that were the lot lines that were conditionally approved to sever the existing dwellings, an application is required in order to modify the zoning boundary of that existing agricultural employment -22 zone to form the boundary between the proposed business operation and the surplus dwelling, lot number 1, and also to rezone the portion of the subject lands outside of the St. George settlement area from agricultural to an A-9 to prohibit a dwelling as a permitted use on this portion of the property. None of the agencies and departments circulated raised any concerns. Throughout the consent and rezoning application process, staff have taken the appropriate measures to ensure consistency with provincial policy, conformity to the official plan, and zoning bylaw compliance. It's being recommended that the application be approved. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question or a planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or an agent of the applicant here? Like to speak? Please come forward. State your name and address.
Hello, Mr. Chair. My name is Nassim Bozorgme. I work with Armstrong Planning and Project Management, acting as agent on behalf of Mr. Ross Eilert, the current owner of the subject lands. I am in agreement with the recommendation of the staff, and I have no objection. So I'm here to answer any questions if there are any.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much. Any member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll turn it back to the committee. How does the committee wish to deal with this application? Member Pierce? Member Pierce moves, seeking a seconder, seconded by Member House. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This will be part of the planning presentation to council 3 weeks from this evening for final approval. That concludes the public hearings for this evening. Moving on to consent items. Consent items to be approved, there are none. There's one under B, that's the minutes of the Heritage Committee. How does the committee wish to deal? Moved by Member Coleman to receive, second by Member Miller. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. There are no committee reports listed. There are no staff reports listed. We have communications. We have a letter here. How does the committee wish to deal with this letter? Member Bailey? Bailey moves to receive, seeking a seconder. Second by Member Chambers. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Other business. Member Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I stated at the beginning of the meeting, the issue is kennel site-specific zoning bylaw application fees. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this issue was brought forward to me by Mrs. Vary, who is actually here observing tonight, and it's regarding application for kennel zoning site-specific areas. For the new members of the committee, Brant County is a little bit different in how they handle kennels. Some municipalities allow kennels without zoning changes, that they're permitted uses in agricultural zones. In Brant County, we require kennels to have a site-specific zoning bylaw to allow them to exist. What normally happens is if someone wants to establish a kennel, they will apply for a zoning change to allow for the kennel, and there's a fee associated with that. and they are encouraged to apply for a temporary 3-year zoning zone, which allows for the impacts to be looked at, and then after 3 years, if everything's all good, they can apply for a permanent zoning or another 3-year temporary zoning, which is, which is okay. But what the issue is that it is unfair, in my opinion, and in the opinion of Mrs. Very, obviously, that they are double charged for the application in that they have to pay an application fee for the temporary zoning, and then they have to pay another application fee for the additional zoning. And if it's another temporary zoning, then they have to come back in 3 years and pay another fee. And that's unfair. It's double dipping for, to establish a kennel. So I talked to our general manager, and he has suggested a resolution that I am not going to put forward at this time, because that would be procedurally not right. But what I am going to do is move that the following resolution be placed on the CDC agenda, probably the consent agenda, for consideration. So that's my motion, and here's the resolution. Whereas in the case of dog kennels that are required to obtain a temporary zoning bylaw as a means of allowing the county to assess the impacts prior to obtaining a zoning bylaw amendment, that council amend the fee and charges bylaw to apply a credit in the amount equal to the fee for a temporary use zoning bylaw toward the fee required for a permanent zoning bylaw amendment. And that essentially charges the applicant for a zoning application rather than double dipping, charging for two. So my motion is that that resolution be placed on the CDC committee agenda, probably the consent agenda, for consideration. It's kind of a notice of motion. And that's it, Mr. Chairman.
So you've made this motion. Do you have a second, Member Chambers? Member Pierce seconds. Questions or comments? Member Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I guess for myself and maybe others around the horseshoe here that don't know, what is the difference in price? Do you know?
It's a couple $1,000, actually.
Okay.
It's significant. And again, not to debate the fee or anything, but actually the motion is, I didn't want to spring it on you. I want to kind of give it as a notice of motion. But there is probably what I would ask in, as a companion to this resolution, perhaps staff could just give a short rationale accompanying that resolution at the CDC, on the CDC agenda, and that would kind of smooth out the edges.
Because if I could, Mr. Chair, I agree with the motion in the sense that if in fact we are, double dipping here, because it's something that we put on that I agree with the fact of let's do it temporary to see if there is any impact on it, then I don't want to do away with that because I think that's prudent for us to do so. But if we're again charged in the double whammy, I would support that. Thank you.
Member LaFerriere,
Through
your hands up too.
you, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chair.
Mark.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, I guess a general question for other folks around the horseshoe here would be, are there other times where we may be double dipping in the same way, such as when somebody has a 10-year garden suite application and they come for another 10 years, or because maybe this might be good housekeeping to do for more than just this, if it's the same fairness and equity principle.
And that was kind of the electronic conversation I had with the general manager. There may be other issues as well. I think we can all see that if we ask for a temporary zoning and then demand an additional couple $1,000 later on for the permanent zoning, at least they should have credit for the the fee for the temporary zoning, which seems fair. And there may be other examples as well, and that may be part of the rationale that I would request staff perhaps to accompany with that resolution at the CDC committee.
Member Bailey?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think when we say things like that out loud and they make so much sense that we should obviously support a recommendation like that. The only thing that I'd like to tweak a little bit is taking away the word dog and just use kennel, just for the cats and the rabbits of the world. And, but I mean, when we say things like that loudly and they make so much sense, I mean, I don't understand how anyone can think that's muddy. It's just right. So thank you for the resolution.
Member Chambers?
And I would pass that on to Mrs. Vary, who actually had the courage to come and explain that to me, which made a lot of sense to me, and that's why I put it forward. I would have liked to have had this as a notice of motion at this committee so we could deal with it right here and now, because I think there's support for it. But again, procedurally, technically, it's one of those fee and bylaw changes rather than a planning. It's kind of, that's why I say if it can go on the consent agenda, it would move forward quite easily. And I've been told that, again, electronically, through the general manager, that they've talked to the Treasury Department as well. So it's almost in place if we can just get it passed.
Any other member of committee with a question? Seeing none? All those in favor to move this to CDC? Opposed? It's carried. Moving on, General Manager's update. Do you have an update?
Just one quick item, Mr. Chair. I'd like to advise the committee that we have hired a policy planner after many months of search. Her name's Jennifer Boyer. She comes from the City of Ottawa and is a policy planner with them. And she will be starting on April 23rd. And that's all I have.
Any member of committee with a question of our General Manager? Seeing none? Thank you. There are no items listed in camera. Next meeting is April 2nd, here at 7 p.m.